board chair and executive committee member extraordinaire, all the things. Everyone knows Jeff. So, but we're pleased to be joined today by Dr. Terry Goodin. He is a true Hoosier at heart. He was raised on a family farm where he learned the value of hard work and community. His unwavering dedication to public service has been a cornerstone of his professional life. Most recently, he served as State Director of Rural Development with the United States Department of Agriculture, a role that exemplified his commitment to improving the lives of rural Hoosiers. Prior to his role with the USDA, he served as public school educator and spent many years in education. I'm sure we'll hear a little more about that today. And then he was elected in 2000 and served 20 years in the Indiana House of Representatives and was chosen by his colleagues as the House Minority Leader in 2017. As a member of the Indiana General Assembly, Dr. Goodin committed his time to creating better opportunities for Indiana through educational, agricultural, and rural development initiatives, and was a staunch advocate for the expansion of broadband connectivity. He also served as State Budget Committee, was Vice Chair of the Ways and Means, member of many other committees, graduate of Eastern Kentucky University and Indiana University, Bloomington, and he is with us today from Boston. So thank you so much for joining us. Anything else that I left out of that list of accomplishments that you want to add?
Well, I think you may have left out my most important job, and I'm a dad. I've got 3 children, so 2 boys and a girl, and my wife does.
Great. We appreciate you being with us.
Good to be here. Thank you folks for having me.
So, with Dr. McCormick's background in education, what strategies did the two of you plan to implement as governor and lieutenant governor that you weren't able to implement previously?
So as we move forward in the state of Indiana, we understand that a lot of times in the past, those individuals that have been trying to figure out, individuals being the politicians, the bureaucrats that's running the state, they a lot of times say, okay, Indiana's got a problem with education. They point a finger, Indiana's got a problem with education. Or they point a finger, Indiana's got a problem with economic development. They point a finger. It's not just a finger, folks. It's going to take the whole hand to figure out what's going on in Indiana. So if you look at this, as we move forward and we kind of use that as a metaphor, we look at number 1, education. It's got to be in the center point of everything that we do and move forward. Economist Michael Hicks and also Morton Marcus, if you know those names, they have said that where there's higher educational attainment, there's higher paychecks. And I heard an amen back there in the back, so thank you. So we've got to look at that. Then you've got to have the job training. We know that the economic opportunity with job training, so people can advance in the career that they're at. We've got to have housing, health care, and probably as we move forward, more than anything, we've got to figure out how do we work our taxing system in the state of Indiana and make it more equitable. Now, there's the 5 that we have on the hand, okay? It takes all of those components to move a state forward, not just one of those. But the most important part of that is, if you'll notice, the thumb is the education, because it can touch, and it has to touch, and it will touch every single other finger on the hand. So we've got to focus on education. We've got to move forward in that aspect. And I'm truly disappointed. I was talking earlier with the new standards that were submitted by the governor's office. That's a true disappointment to someone who's spent a career trying to lift students to a higher level to see those standards that we brought out. So we can jump into that a little more.
And we will. We're going to jump into that. There's some questions. I know my higher ed colleagues are really curious about your thoughts. I want to talk about the thumb and 2 of the fingers. And so you think about the tax base and having the resources to provide for pre-K. Pre-K is often an opportunity for folks to join the workforce. Pre-K is education. So there's 3 pieces. How can you provide for fully funded pre-K pre-K so that others have an opportunity to join the workforce and therefore a stronger economic future?
Yeah, so I appreciate you bringing up pre-K, and those folks who don't know anything about my previous background in education, but at the legislature, I was a very staunch advocate to try to implement pre-K, because we understand and we see the stats, you see all the research. If a student is able to attend that early learning, that benefits them as they travel through the education system. So pre-K is very important. And another thing that we can do is, we know that there's a real child care problem out there, that a lot of women or single family folks want to go to work, whether that is a woman or a man. They want to go to work, but they can't, because they can't afford the $600 or $700 child care cost or bill, because at the end of the day, they're not making, they go in the hole because of the cost of child care. So what we've got to figure out is that's an economic development part of Indiana. There are plenty of resources in our state without raising any taxes, without trying to figure out how do we get new revenue. There are all kinds and plenty of resources in our state to be able to fund pre-K, and if you'll combine that pre-K with the child care and what that looks like, then that creates a huge opportunity, and that needs to be looked at in the economic development sector, and not just the education sector. One of those fingers, economic development, the thumb, we have to touch those together, and instead of looking at these issues in silos, is what most commonly called, but I call them fingers. Instead of looking at them as fingers, we look at them as a hand. We can resolve those issues. It's all about priorities, Jeff. And the state of Indiana has got to make education a real priority, instead of always every 3 or 4 years coming back and saying we've got an educational crisis. So it's just about priorities.
So I know you talked about the new criteria that's being rolled out for education, and that's such a big topic right now. In addition to the criteria for graduation and meeting the needs of higher education, there's also the need for businesses to be able to take the time and set up the standards and allocate their employees toward mentoring students. How do you see the state working with businesses to make that happen and make it viable?
Well, I think as we move forward in education, there's got to be a component of an internship type experience in education. And with it, and I'm looking at you, but I'm also going to look at folks in the audience. I apologize, I'm give everybody whiplash here watching me. But there's got to be that opportunity where, as we move forward, we've got to give kids the opportunity to understand what career path they want to take. And a lot of times they don't understand that until they actually get out of school and college, and they start their job. They scratch their head one morning when they wake up because they don't want to get out of bed, and they think, oh my God, I hate going to work today, or any day. And then it's just compound. So we've got to give those folks that experience before they have the training and all that to get into a job. So as we work together, there needs to be a nice component of internship or job shadowing or some part of the educational process as students go through, so they can kind of get a better idea of what their careers might look like. Because in the communities that we all know in Indiana, every single community has its own personality. And really the students in those communities only know what they experience. And a lot of times in certain communities, that may just be one factory that makes hubcaps. So they're going to grow up and make hubcaps. What we've got to do is we've got to expose them to all the other opportunities in the world, not just in their community. So if we expose them to the other opportunities of the world, and we give them the training and the expertise to be able to do that, then that lifts up the educational attainment, and that allows those folks who decide they may not want to go to college, but they want to get training in another way to get that accomplished.
So I know you and Dr. McCormick have a strong commitment to education. How would you address the critique right now from IU and Purdue and others saying that the proposed new core curriculum will not prepare students then to meet the admissions requirements of today's colleges and universities?
Yeah, so I'm just going to be honest with you. I'm going to rant and rave until they change it, because it's a path to mediocrity is what they've proposed. And as a school superintendent, my whole job was to try to figure out how do we move the bar up instead of, so kids can jump over it. not lowering it down so they just kind of look over it or crawl over it. So what we've got to figure out is, hey, I realized growing up as a kid, and a lot of you folks as well, that I'd probably figure out I can get over that bar. It's a matter of where they put it. I could usually figure out how to get over it. So what we did in our school corporations, we put together a program where we raised the bar. We partnered with Ivy Tech and Indiana University Southeast, and with that partnership, our students graduated with associate's degrees before they got their high school diploma. So I'll tell you how that works later. It sounds great. We all know that college semesters are shorter, so that's how they got the degree first before the high school diploma. But what we've got to do is with that, there's reasons why we chose our students to get degrees. And we demanded that they get a degree. There's dual credit's okay. I'm a fan of dual credit, but I'm not a fan of dual credit as a school superintendent. I think you've got to continue that and you've got to finish that. Number one, dual credit disappears after so many years. You don't get to take those courses with you forever. A degree follows you forever. Number two, the Pell Grant, college help, the college help that we get to fund students to go to school. There's a timeline on that, and that starts when your education, higher education starts. So there's a couple of reasons why we do that, is because that degree goes with you. The dual credit may not. So we want to make sure that they get that degree. But on the other side, okay, that's great. Kids are going to college. That's wonderful. Well, what we also did was, as I was telling Ron earlier, is we put together a vocational program where our students decided what career path they wanted to take. When they decided that career path, they started that training, and when they finished, they got an international certification for whatever field or study they were going into. They just didn't get a check mark in a box that said, hey, this boy or girl can weld now. They got an international certification. If they wanted to, when they graduated from the high school where I was at, they could have went to Dubai and done underwater welding if they would have wanted to do that. So we've got to make sure that we create opportunity. And as we have students come through our school, what I always wanted to make sure was the fact of this. I want to give every single student in this school the opportunity to do whatever they want to do in this world, whatever that may be. So that when you focus on that and that becomes the focus, then we can move forward. I think what's happened now is the focus is how do we fill jobs of today because of the unemployment. There's low, there's plenty of jobs out there for folks, and there's a lot of places that are hiring. You folks may be experiencing the same thing. So that focus of what's going on today just leads to failure as you move forward. You've got to plan out. You've got to think out. You've got to plan out. So.
When we think about planning out and talk about higher education, how can we make higher education more accessible and affordable for recent high school graduates and also adult learners?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And you know, when I was going through college, you could go to college, public university, and not have to ascend that mountain of debt when you got finished. So we've got to do just that. It's, as I said earlier, it's about priorities, folks. It's about priorities. The state of Indiana needs to start funding our higher education facilities and units at a better level, at a higher level. Because we all know when the state cuts funding, those universities have to have money to be able to operate, and really their only other option is they have to raise tuition or some form of value to be able to get the money. So hey, why don't we fund those universities at the proper level? And let me tell you something, that's not an expense. Don't let anybody ever kid you or try to pull your leg to say that education is a huge expense for the state of Indiana. It's not an expense, it's called an investment. And if you don't make investments in your life, you're never going to get a return. And that's what's going on in Indiana right now. They look at education as an expense and not an investment, and that's why we're struggling. That's why we're having a hard time. Folks don't realize this, but the relative economic activity and growth in the state of Indiana for the last 20 years, folks, the last 20 years, the state of Indiana has been last. That's first of the worst, okay? And Hoosiers can do better. Hoosiers can do better. Those stats come from economist Mike Hicks at Ball State University, who's also a columnist. We can do better than that in Indiana, and we've got to do better.
So let's talk about investment with the economy. So we'll switch from education to the economy. So we participated in Ready 1.0, Ready 2.0. Often money goes to communities that show population increase. Here in East Central Indiana, the challenge is that we have folks leaving the community. Yet industry's coming in, great EDC, right? we have industry coming in, but getting folks to live here and such. And so, do you foresee, if elected, there'll be a Ready 3.0? And if so, what would you change about the process, allocation of funds and criteria?
So I want to start out by saying this. The state of Indiana should not be picking winners or losers in communities across our state. I'm not sure if you folks have heard of the ILEAP district in Boone County, but the state has spent billions of dollars to create an industrial park in Boone County, Indiana. All of the research has proven that the type of industry they want to bring there, they're going to need over 100 million gallons of water a day. Right now, that area can only supply 7 million gallons of water. So there's going to have to be some thought and foresight in our investments as we move forward. Getting back to your question with Ready Grant, the Ready Grant is great, but the way it is dispersed and the way it is determined on who gets that money is not necessarily the way that the McCormick Goodin team would do that. We always look at having the communities show interest in where they want to be. Not everyone wants to be like Richmond, and Richmond doesn't want to be like every other community in the state of Indiana. The Ready Grant kind of throws out a blanket cover and says, hey, if you do these things, you get this Ready Grant, this money. Well, what about a community that wants to be unorthodox? They want to do something a lot different. Indiana has got to step up our stature and become more obvious to our benefits of people around the nation. A lot of folks point out that, as we move forward, the number one export the state of Indiana sends out of our state is our young adults. And the reason that's the case is because of the lack of opportunity and economic development. We've got to figure out with the Ready Grant, we pull those dollars together. There's no reason why that the Ready Grant, if you're looking at those dollars and the amount of money that goes into that, why aren't we tying that somehow into the child care situation? And why aren't we tying that into the educational situation or the condition? Why don't we tie that in the funding of higher ed? All of those, we start looking at this as a partnership, or we start looking at the big picture and these units as a whole as to just single units. Then we start getting economies of scale. We start getting opportunities where you create partnerships with different agencies that you didn't even realize you had anything in common with. So as we move forward and we do these things, then we create new opportunity. And new opportunity always creates new ideas and new thoughts and better ways to do things. So with that Ready, there needs to be Ready. We need to move forward with that, but I think the structure of that needs to change. So once again, I'm going to say this: the state of Indiana, nor any government, should be picking winners and losers in communities of who wins and loses. That should be the community's decision on what direction they want to go, and not them not being coerced or forced to go get the money.
Adding on to that, when you think about working with the IEDC, how do we ensure that there's an economic plan that benefits all 92 counties?
So we just have to do just exactly that. We have to put together and we have to make sure that there's an economic plan that benefits all 92 counties. And as I said before, there's certain parts of the state of Indiana, those places are doing great, and there's other places that aren't doing so well. As a state director of rural development, I've traveled across the entire state of Indiana. And as I would go into communities, it seemed like a lot of these communities were going out of business. And the reason I say that is this: once I drove past the dollar store and the McDonald's out on the bypass, I would get to the downtown squares and it was desolate. All the shops and the buildings around the courthouse were all empty, or weekly yard sales. We have to figure out what growth looks like in every single county, not even the regional part of that. I like the regional aspect if it works, but if it don't work, we shouldn't be forcing communities to partner if they have nothing in common, or if they're never going to have anything in common. So what we've got to do is we've got to put together a group of officials and growth. The Ball State University has got the nation's best college of economic growth and growth for communities in the nation. They've got an architecture school that is absolutely fabulous. So why aren't we addressing our problems and issues in our state with the professionals and those folks who are training other people who go to other states and do great things, and they're right here in Indiana and we're not using it. So there's got to be a better opportunity to figure out, number one, you want growth. But more importantly, as I've traveled and talked to community leaders, you don't just want growth. growth is great. Tell them you'll call them back. You're good. So you want growth. Growth sounds great, right? Hey, we're going to create growth in the state of Indiana. But guess what? We don't just want growth. You've got to have smart growth. You've got to have growth that makes sense. So as we put and the reason I say that is this, it makes no sense to put any kind of facility in Boone County, Indiana that has to use a lot of water because they don't have water there. Why don't we locate those businesses or those entities in areas that have plenty of water? That's a natural resource that they've got to be able to use in those areas to be able to accommodate or create new businesses. So we've got to take a look at that, and there's got to be a very, very laser-focused approach on every single county as a single county and not as a region or as a state as a whole.
So let's talk about growth and growth for businesses and growth for individuals. And let me speak personally as an employer. The new DOL standards, Department of Labor standards on classification of employees is a real challenge here in Indiana. How do we balance the need for income growth for employees and the impact of inflation on businesses and families? Right. Particularly in an area that doesn't have the cost of living that New York City does, and these new DOL standards.
Right. Well, and you're correct. It seems to be a nightmare in our state with that worker classification. And there's another part of that as well that goes along with that, and that's called wage theft. There's a lot of wage theft going on in the state of Indiana from workers who come into our state. They work for construction companies and they never get paid. So, and there's nothing that really forces these Indiana companies or corporations, the large corporations, and they're not really corporations you want to hire. They're fly by night. That's their whole intention, is to come in and do this and make more money and leave. They create a business entities so they can't be tracked down. You can't sue them for this entity because this entity is owned by this entity and this entity here is owned by this one. So by the time you get through the merry-go-round or the Ferris wheel, you can't even find who the real owners are. So a hedge fund somewhere in New York. So we've got to work on all of the labor issues in Indiana as we move forward. And really, that boils down, I'm not picking on the IEDC today, but this boils down into recruitment and priorities once again. The Economic Development Corporation, number one, has got to make small business the number one priority in the state of Indiana. Small business is the largest job creator in our state. And we've got to figure out how do we work with small businesses so they can stay in business and continue to create jobs. Then on the other side of that, we look at, hey, what type of industry or what type of business or what type of jobs do we want to create in the state of Indiana? And it's great for the governor or whoever to stand up there and say, well, by golly, we created 300 jobs this month, most in history. That's okay to say that, but what I would prefer they say is this: we created 300 jobs that pay a living wage in our state. As a school superintendent, there was nothing more frustrating than to see a tax abatement go to a business in the industrial park that didn't pay a living wage, and when their students came to school, God bless them, they then qualified for free lunch, free books. So really, the school corporation and taxpayers were subsidizing that corporation once again through the school corporation because of the free entities that they all qualified for because their parents worked at this factory. I say this, and I say it every single time I speak. No Hoosier should work a full-time job in the state of Indiana and still live in poverty. Absolutely should be unaccountable. Go ahead and clap. That should not even be an issue in the state of Indiana. If you work a full-time job, you should be able to raise your family on that full-time job and not have to worry about going in debt to your neck just to be able to make it. So we've got to make that a priority. Hey, maybe it's time to quit bringing in all these $10, $12, $13 an hour manufacturing jobs, and let's focus on jobs that may need a little bit higher education or training, but they pay a lot more money. So you combine the higher end jobs with the small business job creation, and you put those together, you can't lose. That is a winning combination, folks. I'm telling you right now, that's a winning combination.
So, knowing that Indiana is traditionally fiscally conservative, how do we go about increasing funding when we look at the needs for education, infrastructure, and social support services in an ongoing basis?
Yeah, so there are different types of fiscal conservatives. Indiana has a lot of those. I'm a fiscal conservative, but I'm a fiscal conservative that will sit here and tell you right now, like the plan that was submitted the other day by several folks who talked about it, the property tax reduction plan. You can't cut your way out of a crisis. You cannot cut your way out of an issue like that. You have to grow your way out of a property tax crisis or a tax crisis. And when you grow, you create more jobs, you create higher paying jobs, that creates more revenue. The more revenue you have then that's taxable, that creates more revenue for the state of Indiana. And you just can't pull the rug out of local government by saying we're gonna cut your local property taxes. The state of Indiana does not get 1 penny of property tax, folks. The state does not get any of that. That is all local government and schools, okay? So it's pretty easy for the governor candidate to stand up and say, we're gonna cut your property taxes. That's not gonna impact the state any, but you know what? I don't want somebody to come and tell me what they're gonna do to help me if they're not truly gonna help me, right? So what we've gotta figure out is hey, any dollar that's taken from local government, cut from local government, should have to be replaced by the entity that cuts that dollar. So if the state of Indiana and the legislature, if those folks are gonna cut local property taxes, then they should have to replace that with dollars from the state of Indiana. There should be a property tax replacement fund if you're gonna do that. It's simple to do. You create better jobs, you create the property tax replacement fund to replace those tax dollars. It's pretty simple. It's really simple.
So we sit at a point of probably the largest investment in our community in maybe history. We're at a great point. Part of that is quality of place, because we want to entice folks to move here and make this their home, like I did 12 years ago. So how would you define quality of place? Because when we talk about quality of place, sometimes it's an ancillary, that if we have time, we'll get to it. Others, it's core to who we are and the home we want to create. How would you and Dr. McCormick define quality of place, and how important is that for a community?
You know, Jeff, as you know, there are a gazillion different definitions of quality of place. But I think really when it boils down to this is a quality of place is somewhere where you can live and work and raise a family comfortably. And it's called a living wage. All of that has to play in. With that quality of place, you have to have opportunities for recreation. But the most important piece of that, I'm gonna go back to the thumb once again, and I'm gonna tell you folks, Richmond is great. You got great people doing the economic development. You got an absolutely wonderful economic development group. Matter of fact, it's a group that a lot of folks across the state should probably try to emulate. So thank you for all of that. Yeah. So, and here's what you've done though, and this is so huge. We've got a gentleman sitting here that is got an IU pin on his lapel that makes a huge opportunity, creates huge opportunity for communities to be able to operate. I mean, you create quality of place by offering the highest levels of education that you can offer someone. And when you do that, guess what they don't have to do? They don't have to get in a car like I did and travel for an hour and a half to go take a graduate class. They can do that right here in their hometown. Or they can take college classes right here in their hometown. You've got to figure out ways for people to make opportunities to better themselves. Why do we work? Why do we work? Why do people get up and go to work? Number one, it's fulfillment, yeah, but why do we really work? It's to make money, right? And create opportunities and fun. So what we've got to do is we've got to create opportunities for folks to make more money. Just flat bottom part of that. And every economist will tell you, the largest rung on the socio-economic ladder is a better education. And that education doesn't necessarily have to be higher ed. It means that you have a better training and you're skilling up in the job that you had, whether that's a welder or even an accountant. You use that training to skill up, and every time you skill up, you make more dollars. When you make more money, you're able to go on vacations, you're able to do those things in life that create quality of place. And a quality of place doesn't necessarily mean that you have parks and playgrounds and dog parks and skateboard parks and all of that. That means that you are giving the people that live in your community the opportunity to be able to access those types of amenities and those types of play. All right, so that's, to me, that's what quality of place means as we move forward in the state of Indiana.
So housing is a huge topic right now, all across the state. We look at Indianapolis and the donut counties, and they're growing by leaps and bounds, and it's wonderful. But then rural communities like ours struggle to entice developers and then to navigate some of the hurdles that go along with infrastructure, et cetera. How do we address that?
So, you know what, that's what I did for the last 2.5 years, and, so the USDA has it's called a subdivision program where the communities can go out and take 10 acres of property. We prefer that it's property that's already in the city limits and already has the infrastructure. But you go out, you can, and it's up to like 40 acres that you can purchase. And the USDA will fund that through a loan, a 0% loan. And unbelievably, there was only one of those that was done last year in the whole entire United States. And I'm proud to say that was done in Indiana. So you have to do what you just said, you have to go do that. Infrastructure, folks, is the most expensive part of building. We know that. Some developers tell us that you run water and sewer, it's $1 million a month to do that, to get it underground and do all that. So really, as we move forward, the state of Indiana should be in the infrastructure business. And we should be creating opportunities for these communities to be able to improve their infrastructure, number one, because there are a lot of communities out there, the infrastructure was put in the 40s and 50s and 30s, and it's all crumbling, and it's not adequate. And number two, you can't have good economic development without having good infrastructure that goes along with that. So as we move forward, the state of Indiana, through the IADC, through the IFA, the Indiana Finance Authority, all of those entities have the dollars to be able to fund infrastructure programs so communities can grow. We need to put together what we called circuit riders, and those are people who excel in economic development and community growth, to visit communities, schedule these folks in these communities, go down, sit down with them, and say, hey, what do you want your community to look like? Now, I'm not talking about yesterday. We don't want you to tell us what you want your community to look like a year from now or 2 years from now. In 1 decade, 10 years, whenever we come back and sit at this table, what do you want your community to look like? And then you implement an action plan for that smart growth to reach that goal. So Indiana we pale in opportunity for communities that don't have the resources to be able to go out and hire folks to be able to develop plans of growth for that community. I'm going to continue to say this. We have to make the field level. There must be a level playing field for every single community in the state of Indiana. The state of Indiana just can't just continue to pick winners and losers. Like you said, developers are building houses in Indianapolis, at the outskirts of Indianapolis, because that's where they can make the most money. Well, why wouldn't you put together a tax credit incentive for developers to build those same houses or the houses that the community wants somewhere else? You can level the playing field because the market is going to dictate in those counties. You don't have to have an incentive to build there. People are already building there and it's being done. But why don't the state of Indiana put together the tax credit opportunities for those developers to go outside of that area and build in communities that need that housing? There is a huge housing crisis in the state of Indiana right now. And unless you live in certain areas, you can't find a new home. So we've got to fix that. That shouldn't be the case. I get amazed at thinking about how Indiana has fell behind when I think about this. This is 2024. There are still people in the state of Indiana that have dial-up internet, folks. You guys remember that screeching noise that you used to hear and how that would drive you nuts? There are communities that still have that, and it was so aggravating to hear the lieutenant governor come in and speak about, we're going to create rural economic development, and talk about all these things they're going to do with rural Indiana. And folks may not believe it, but this is rural Indiana. All right, I'm sitting in rural Indiana. We talk about that. But and they talk about all these wonderful things they're going to do in rural Indiana. They're going to create all these businesses and jobs there. And I finally got sick of hearing it. And I said, ma'am, you talk about rural development, but in no sentence with that rural development did you ever mention high-speed internet. You cannot have rural development without having high-speed internet. You can't do it. You can't create business now without having high-speed internet. So how in the world are you going to create rural development or economic development areas that don't have access to the new transportation system, that system that carries the information we need to be able to move forward? And so that is going to be a huge priority. It was a huge priority with the Biden administration with the infrastructure plan. The state of Indiana right now is sitting on billions, with a B, not an M, billions of dollars for high-speed internet build-out, and they're sitting. I proposed a plan to the state, working in partnership with the USDA because they were struggling to try to figure out who had internet and didn't. You folks remember the advertisement that Farm Bureau had, hey, stop along the roadway, ping this cell site and let us know whether there's good internet there. I proposed a plan that we wanted to work with the USDA, but it had to be implemented by the state. When I talked to the Department of Education and the governor's office, I said, Governor, why don't we have the Department of Education, the secretary, just say, hey, we've got an extra credit homework the next 2 nights. We're going to everybody go home and we're going to test our internet. We're going to go online and I want you to answer these 5 questions from your house, from your internet. And overnight, you'll be able to determine where there's internet, where there's not, how good is that internet in those areas. Because there's a student that lives in every township, in every county of the state of Indiana. And we can determine where that internet access is. And they're still trying to figure it out. That's been a year and a half ago. They're still trying to figure out whether to do a homework assignment. So some of these solutions are pretty simple. And it's almost like they look for reasons not to do something instead of trying to figure out reasons how to get it out the door. Now, I've got friends that are still in the legislature. And every time we meet, we talk, I just kind of shake my head and roll my eyes. It's like, hey, guys, what are you getting done, you know? And it's really frustrating. And one lady that comes to the group and chats with us, these are folks in the majority party. They said, Terry, we can't get over the extremism and the radicalism that's going on. And they said by the time we fight through the extremism and the things that people want to do to other people or whatever don't want to do, by the time we get through that, we're all exhausted. We got it all. We can't really talk about what needs to be done. It's kind of like Jeff and I talked about, folks, like for town council and city council meetings. A lot of times folks just come in there and complain about their neighbor's dog, and they have to deal with those kinds of issues, which are important, but that does not allow those folks to be able to concentrate on the future and try to how to figure out smart growth. The same thing's going on right now in the legislature. They're in there talking about their neighbor's dogs barking or issues that are individual right issues or those kinds of issues, and not talking about how do we move the entire state of Indiana forward. So there's going to have to be a balance and change as we kind of move forward. Without that balance or change, we're going to continue to be in this rut that we're in the state of Indiana. I'm not trying to be political at all. Please don't take that as being a political statement. If you look at my voting record when I was in the legislature, you wouldn't be able to tell what side of the aisle. You would have never been able to tell. All right, and I think that's the way it should be. Because when I got elected, I represented Hoosiers, not Democrats or Republicans. I represented Hoosiers, and I took pride in trying to figure out how much I could bring the most money or the most programs back to my district. And we have folks now in the political world that refuse programmatic dollars. That makes no sense to me whatsoever. I don't get it. That just it made it blows my mind. Why are you even there? If you can't bring good quality projects, programs, dollars back to your legislative district, why are you there representing? It makes no sense.
One of the things moving here from the DC area is just enjoy that folks are sensitive. That was on full display during the pandemic. Thanks to the work of the chamber. Just Hoosiers are sensible people. So you think about a sensible response to education. You think about a sensible response to housing and how desperately needed. Let's think about a sensible response to healthcare. Unfortunately, talk about the bottom again. Hoosiers, Indiana ranks at the bottom of the 50 states on healthcare. Talk about the Holcomb administration's made a large investment to help improve the health of Hoosiers through the Health First Indiana initiative. Currently, all health departments have agreed to become part of the program. So how will your administration help to improve the health of Hoosiers? And will the Health First Indiana funding continue in the long term? And when we talk about healthcare, that is a very present need in this community, the health careers.
Absolutely, and as we talk about healthcare, it's probably, it's one of those issues we talked about on the hand. We've got to figure out how to fix that. As we move forward, folks, right now, the structure of the state of Indiana, the way we're allowed to be communities to be able to operate healthcare centers or corporations to come in, there's no competition whatsoever in the state of Indiana. Whether that's good or bad, I'm not going to pass judgment on that because I'm not sitting in the seat and have the information that folks are in charge of that make those decisions. But what I can tell you is this: we have got to stop the loss of these rural hospitals. There's been 3 rural hospitals closed in the state of Indiana. I think my number's correct in the last 3 years. And what that means is they're healthcare deserts. That means that someone who has a normal heart attack that could be saved if they get to a hospital within 20 or 25 or 30 minutes, that means now they don't make it. They pass away because the hospital is now 50 miles away. So we've got to figure out in the state of Indiana what a solid healthcare system looks like. And it's got to be comprehensive. It just can't be this group focuses on this in this county, because we've got only a handful of counties now that even have maternity departments in the hospital. Ladies have to go 3 or 4 counties away or to the city just to have a baby, and they used to deliver babies in homes. All right, that's probably not the most complicated. Now there are some complications. I'm not trying to minimize that. It's a real serious procedure. Just ask my wife and I when they all go through that. So, and it is. And so why would you have to travel 3 counties over just to have a baby? Those are the kind of things that don't make sense to what we talk about with quality of place. Jeff, you mentioned quality of place. One of those things that you've got to have for quality of place is you've got to have access or opportunity to be able to get healthcare, good healthcare. And right now that's missing in the state of Indiana. And quite frankly, they can blame IU Health, they can blame Eskenazi, they can blame community, but it's not their fault. Their corporations, their businesses, okay? Their mission is healthcare, but the state of Indiana is the one that should take the blame for that. Because the state of Indiana is the one that sets up the structure and the guidelines and the rules that these hospitals have to follow. So I think there needs to be a real comprehensive look at what the healthcare system in Indiana is doing and how can it do better.
Well, we have other questions, but I know there are people sitting here today that have come with their own questions. So I want to give an opportunity for any of you to chime in. Does anyone have a pressing question that hasn't been answered? Eric?
Yeah, I want to go back to what you said about exporting our young people. I lead a team of 10 software developers. Only 4 of us at the moment live in Richmond, and one of them is planning to move away. We can do remote work for the whole rest of the team, so it's hard for me to say you got to be here in the office. But I'm looking for ways that at the state level and also at the local level that we can make living here attractive. Like the opportunity exists. We're paying a lot. Software developers are not cheap if you don't know that.
Right.
But they want to move away. They want to go. Well, in one case, actually in 2 cases, it was an immigration issue. Our national immigration laws did not allow this person to stay here in the country, even though they had a good job, even though they're contributing to the community. Unless you win that H-1B lottery,
Yeah.
you can't stay. So it's been my hobby horse for like 10 years now of we should not be telling talented young people with good jobs that they can't stay in our community.
Right.
But then also I think it's around culture, it's around transportation. A lot of young people don't drive and don't want to.
Right.
So I don't know if you guys can say about that.
I've got 2 nieces that are of driving age, they don't even have a driver's license. I said, well, when I turned 16, that's the first thing I wanted was my driver's license, right? And they don't, it's not an issue for those kids. Now, I don't understand why, but that's just the reality of it. So I think what you've got to do is this: you've got to create a place where people want to live. And okay, what are those things that you can do at the state level that will want people to want to move there? I think number 1 is aesthetics. I think that if you present an opportunity for people to, when they drive home, they're not driving through a highway with grass that's this high that you can't see through or over and garbage all in it. I think what we do is we clean the state of Indiana up. Number one, the administrations of the last two or three governors' mansions who have been residing there, I should say, they've taken pride in saying that, oh, the state workforce is the lowest it's been since 1973. Okay, well, you know what that means? That means that that dead deer that got killed in front of your house on the highway don't get picked up by the state highway workers, because guess why? They're not there to pick it up. There's nobody there to do that, okay? That means that the intersection where there was a wreck, that there was glass scattered everywhere through the intersection, that means it don't get up, and that means you drive over it with your car tires and take a chance on getting a flat tire because there's not highway workers there to get it cleaned up. You've got to create a place where people want to live, okay? We just think about this. When you look at a community and where you want to move to a community, you think about, okay, this is the neighborhood I want to live in, and here's why, okay? Why aren't we asking the young person that's leaving your office job, why don't we ask them, okay, why are you moving to Colorado? Why are you moving to Texas? All right, tell us why. So then we need to start implementing those programs in the state of Indiana to say, oh, here, you know what? The last 300 people that left here, this was a common theme. They said that they couldn't walk out their back door and take a walk through because there's no sidewalks, okay? Well, okay, let's think about that. How do we implement building sidewalks, okay? In government, politicians want people to think that these answers are so much more complicated than what they really are, all right? Because if you make them really complicated, guess what you don't have to do? You don't have to do anything, because you're saying, well, we're working on that. How many times have you talked to a politician and they say, well, we've got an issue here, and they say, we're working on that at the State House, and we're working on that. It's ridiculous. It really is. Number one, we've got to figure out how do we create more state parks and more state reservoirs in the state of Indiana, all right? We've got to give the recreation side of that. We've got to talk about travel. We've got to figure out how do we bring people to the state of Indiana. And you know what, there's nothing more, as an economist will tell you, there's nothing that's a bigger bonus than having somebody from out of your state come into your state and spend money. You know, that's huge bonus. So how do we get those folks here? Well, you got to create opportunities of recreation and opportunities of jobs and those other opportunities to bring people here. And that's what we've got to do, is we've got to sit down and take a look at that. Okay, what does that look like? What does quality of place look like? What does quality of life? We talk about Indiana's a great place to do business, but it's not such a great place to live. Now, so tell me how that works. It don't. You can't have the best business environment and then have the worst air, water, and living conditions. That doesn't go together. It's a short-term Band-Aid fix by attracting corporations who a lot of times are looking for the cheapest place to do business because they know they're going to do business for a decade and they're going to be gone because they're going to get into something else. So we've got to figure out the sustainability part of our programming. That's what I'm telling you right now, folks. Small business has got to be the #1 driver in our Economic Development Corporation, and it's not. You know what? Instead of taking trips to Australia and Spain and China, why don't the IEDC make a trip to Wayne County? Let's make a trip to Wayne County and let's talk to the business folks in Wayne County. How can we help you? What do you need to be successful? What do you see coming down the road that's going to cause a problem for you as a small business? And that's how you get ahead, and that's how you move forward. So, thank you for that question.
We have about 5 minutes, so other questions? Matt?
You talk about housing. You mentioned subdivisions. I have a concern about the older neighborhoods in our communities that are deteriorating because of years of neglect and disinvestment. You talk about quality of life, places where people want to live. Why would someone want to live in a community where they drive through a neighborhood that is extreme poverty, blight, disinvestment, and why aren't we doing more to bring these older neighborhoods back, as opposed to developing new areas on undeveloped land when you already have an existing housing stock that's dying?
Yeah.
The EDC now is putting together a grant proposal to deal with that issue in the Star District. It's a great plan. More and more needs to be done.
Well, I'm gonna tell you this, I'm very familiar with that plan, because that plan is going to look a whole lot like the plan we used at our USDA office. And what we did was we created historic zones, or zones, decade zones. Because we all know that most of these houses that are on Maple Street, they were probably all built in 1928, right? They were built a certain style, architectural style. They were built so far off the road, so wide. So what we did was we convinced communities to put together plans of identifying areas. Then when you identify that area, let's set up a TIF district where the city will have the funds to be able to put together grant dollars. Or let's create a tax credit where if you restore that home back to its architectural integrity and its historical integrity, you get the benefit of these tax credits and these grant dollars that come from the TIF district. And when you do that, you create community, you create neighborhoods. And when you create communities and you create neighborhoods, then you create, like you said, you create a place for people where they want to actually move to and they want to actually live. Right now, there's no incentives to do that. All the incentives are to go out, scratch out holes so you can bury the sewer and water lines and the electric overhead, and eat up 20 acres of the nation's most prosperous farmland. I don't get it. It makes no sense. We've already got the infrastructure in these communities where these houses have become this. So why do we go out and spend millions of dollars on infrastructure when we've got places of opportunity where that infrastructure already exists? So, yes, ma'am.
So the zero APR that you were talking about, would that apply to these older neighborhoods or just the new ones?
No, it would apply. So the state of Indiana, through the Indiana Housing Authority and the Indiana Housing and Development Corporation, they have the opportunity to leverage these dollars, but they're not focused on that. And I know the folks that run it, they get pressure from the legislature. The legislature is the ones that kind of guide what goes on with the building and the housing and all that, because they put together the incentive packages that people use to be able to do that. So, yes, those opportunities are available. We've just got to focus on them. Indiana has a rich, prosperous history, and these communities that we're talking about are very proud. And at one time they were, the only places in America that made certain products. The housing stock. I'm a historian. A part of my degree was in architectural history, and I drive through these communities and I see these certain styles of architecture. I'm thinking, my goodness, I thought this only happened in Brooklyn, New York, and here's a house like that in Kentland, Indiana. So we've got to identify those. We've got to move forward, and how do we restore that integrity back to those communities? But number one, you've got to give communities the opportunity to be able to do that. The state of Indiana is not very friendly to our local communities as far as the ability to be able to raise funds locally, to be able to make improvements. The road money can't be spent on sidewalks. Now wait a minute, if you're going in and building a city street, what, don't you also put sidewalks in? Doesn't that make the place look a whole lot better? So there's just policies that are put in place that make no sense. We've got to be able we've got to figure out how do we, expunge those policies and put together policies that do make sense, and put together policies that want to create, like we said, these villages or neighborhood type communities. Like you said, these homes are absolutely beautiful, and if we can get them restored back to their luster, that's going to make the whole community look better.
So when any of us are employed, it's what we're going to do in the first 90 days. So if elected, what will we see in the first 90 days?
Well, the first 90 days of our administration is going to be, we're going to be scouring, we're going to be up all night long, and we're going to be looking through all the proposals and things that's happened in the last 20 years, because the current administration and the administration previously have not been very transparent. We just know at the end of the day, there's bills that pass, and they said, we passed this bill in the state of Indiana, but we've never seen the alternatives to those bills or anything else because of the supermajorities in the legislature. So we're going to analyze that, and what really got me to step back and take a look was the tax plan that the folks presented. I don't want to mention anybody's names or parties because I don't want to be political, but their tax plan, I'm thinking, wait a minute, they presented this tax plan. I want to see the proposal. What did they look at that came up with? Well, guess what they did yesterday? they had to revise that tax plan because they realized it wouldn't work. So we've got to go in and see what's there first before we start making changes. If anybody can tell me what's going on in the IEDC, meet me after this. Nobody can tell you that. It's like it's a stealth operation, and it's so stealth that even the legislature, if you saw the news in the last legislative session, even the legislature was asking, well, what are you folks doing with all this money? They don't have a clue. We've got to go in and analyze. I think to go in and do surgery on state programs and state agencies without knowing what the ailment is, I think is probably being pretty reckless. So we want to do that. We want to analyze where are the problems, how do we fix it, before we go in and start cutting each other.
And how will, you said we'll be able to be consulted in that diagnosis?
You know, really what I did as the state director of rural development, and what Jennifer McCormick did as the superintendent of public instruction, she visited those areas. She talked to those leaders. I talked and came and talked to the mayors, the town board members of those small communities. What do you need to help move your community forward? Tell us what that is. The McCormick Goodin ticket is going to do that. We're actually going to believe that Hoosiers have the answers to our problems, not some consulting company from California, New York. You know, I'll say this to you folks right now today. There's nothing wrong with Indiana. That's what's right with Indiana. And I'm telling you right now, the Hoosier State, we're full of great ideas and great opportunities. We just have to let those ideas and opportunities be able to flourish. And right now, with the system we've got, they're not flourishing. They're not flourishing.
We're all in for it.
Thank you so much for taking time to come over and spend with us for a little bit this afternoon. We've done a really deep dive into some issues we appreciate. We always like to wrap up and just say, we appreciate you putting your name on the ticket and being willing to serve our state.
Thank you very much. And I will say that I appreciate you folks being here because we're trying to get our message out. Indiana can do better. We really can. And like I said, the folks that have put this together, there's been super majorities now in the legislature for at least a decade, almost 20 years. So the healthcare crisis, the housing crisis, the property tax crisis, the crisis, the education crisis, all those things that are crises were created because there's only one perspective and ideas and thoughts looking at it. So we're going to be able to bring a different idea, a different thought and perspective looking at things so we can bring some balance to the system. And as we move forward, that's got to be a key to everything we do in life. Our entire life, everything we do in life, there must be a balance. If there's not a balance, that means that you're going off deep end one way or the other, you're getting sick, or whatever that might look like. And right now, the state of Indiana is sick. But